Good day from Mission Control Houston, and welcome to Space Station Live. You're looking inside the International Space Station Flight Control Room here at the Johnson Space Center in Houston, Texas. It's Friday, November 22nd, 2013. Inside the room right now, the Orbit 2 team monitoring systems and controlling the orbiting laboratory as it flies 260 miles over the Earth's surface. Inside the room leading the team today is Flight Director Emily Nelson there on the right. And right next to her at the Capcom position, serving as a communication link with the astronauts, is Hal Getzelman. And those astronauts on board the crew of Expedition 38, six-man crew from countries around the globe. They're led by Russian cosmonaut Oleg Kotov there in the front row on the right. Seated on the left there in the front row, JAXA astronaut Koichi Wakata. Going across the back row, Russian cosmonaut Mikhail Turin there on the left. Next to him, NASA astronaut Rick Mastracchio. Then Russian cosmonaut Sergei Ryazanskiy, and finally, all the way on the right there, another NASA astronaut, Mike Hopkins. Busy week on board the International Space Station for the crew, dominated by a range of biological experiments taking place with the astronauts themselves as the subjects. Starting off with Expedition 38 Commander Oleg Kotov, who back on Monday started a 24-hour recording using an electrocardiogram. Also doing some routine maintenance throughout the Russian Zvezda service module on some of the ventilation equipment and also the intercom system. On Tuesday, Kotov got to try his hand at the MotoCard experiment, which looks to study the nature of locomotion disturbances in long-term space flights. The astronauts and cosmonauts using a treadmill for this study. Also on Tuesday, Kotov doing the Russian Signer experiment, which uses the station's vantage point to track and monitor bioproductive areas of the Earth's ocean. On Wednesday, Kotov participating in another Earth observation activity known as Albedo, which uses specialized cameras on board the International Space Station to measure the Earth's albedo, or the amount of solar radiation that is reflected back from the Earth's surface. Controllers and engineers hoping to develop ways to generate electrical power for the station from that solar radiation being reflected from the Earth. On Thursday, Kotov was installing some more communication equipment inside of Zvezda, also doing some ventilation work in the Mini Research Module 2, also known as POISK. And then today on Friday, Kotov will be participating in a drill on the Toru system, which is the telerobotically operated rendezvous system located inside of the Zvezda service module. He'll be rehearsing the techniques that are used to manually take control and fly visiting Progress vehicles in the unlikely event that they experience a failure of their automated Kurs docking system. One such Progress scheduled to come up to the station next week. Fellow Russian cosmonaut Sergei Ryazanskiy back on Monday was in the Russian segment doing a checkout of many of the plug-in systems and also doing some initial acoustic sound level checks throughout the station, the Russian segment on board the station. As on Tuesday and Wednesday, Ryazanskiy was responsible for replacing a number of fans throughout the Russian segment with newer low noise models, and then doing no noise level measurements following all of those replacements. Also on Tuesday, Ryazanskiy participated in some crew medical officer proficiency training. Each of the crew trained in emergency response for themselves and their fellow astronauts and cosmonauts on board. Back on Thursday, Ryazanskiy doing what's known as fungostat treatment to various areas behind panels on the Russian Zarya module, which back on Wednesday celebrated the 15th anniversary of its launch as the first element to launch into space to begin construction of the International Space Station. Then today on Friday, Ryazanskiy doing some routine filter replacement on the dust filtering ventilation system inside of Rassvet, or the Mini Research Module 1. They'll also be taking some measurements from the Russian Matryoshka experiment, which looks to study the radiation dosages that these astronauts are exposed to during their long-duration stay in space. NASA astronaut Mike Hopkins, a lot of his work this week dedicated to those various crew health and biological experiments. Starting off on Monday, Hopkins was busy operating the station's ultrasound for the CardioOx experiment, which looks to provide a better understanding of space-related cardiovascular disease risk, as these astronauts are exposed to a number of identified risk increasers. So this CardioOx experiment looking to study those identity markers as they continue to track health changes in astronauts during long-duration missions and look to develop better countermeasures as well. Also on Monday, Hopkins was replacing an air filter inside of the station's waste and hygiene compartment. Basically, the toilet on board the station, that air filter due for some routine replacement. The waste and hygiene compartment of the WHC feeds directly into the station's water recovery system, a part of the complex water recycling system on board, able to turn wastewater from the astronauts into potable and reusable drinking water. Also on Monday, Hopkins was doing some leak checks inside of the GEM, the Japanese experiment module, in preparation for some satellite deployments that would take place later on. Here we see some video from Tuesday as Hopkins was doing some final leak checks on one of the station's EMUs at the extravehicular mobility units. This was the suit worn by Luca Parmitano back in July during a spacewalk, which was terminated prematurely when Parmitano discovered water building up in his helmet. The final leak checks were done on Tuesday following months of repair and analysis work, as teams here at NASA continue to do some final checks on the suit before getting ready to return it to service and bring the capability for spacewalks through the U.S. segment back online. On Wednesday, Hopkins continued with the biological studies, taking some samples for the Pro-K experiment, which he would do for the next few days. Pro-K, a special diet that the astronauts are put on that proposes a way to lead to decreased loss of bone mineral in the astronaut's body by decreasing the ratio of protein to potassium that they get through their natural dietary intake. Also on Wednesday, Hopkins doing the first experiment run of the week on the capillary flow experiment, fluid physics research project on board investigating capillary flows and the flows of fluids in complex geometric containers. Back on Thursday, Hopkins was taking some more blood and saliva samples for the Human Research Facility and that Pro-K experiment. Was also doing some ocular health scans, or the eye health scans, alongside NASA astronaut Rick Mastracchio and Japanese astronaut Koichi Wakata. Today, Hopkins will be back at the operational controls of the Ultrasound 2 machine, doing some cardiac scans and also taking a few more samples for that Human Research Facility. Mikhail Turin, the third Russian cosmonaut on board the International Space Station, doing a lot of maintenance work on board today, this week. Back on Monday, was doing some software upgrades on Russian control computers and also doing a quick checkout of the Toru system that's being used for that simulation today. On Tuesday, he was doing some preventative maintenance to the ventilation systems inside of the Zvezda service module before doing some more maintenance on Wednesday and also doing some quick work on the Russian Electron device, oxygen-generating equipment on board the station. On Thursday, Turin engaged in a range of experiment work, starting off with the Russian virtual experiment, which looks to obtain new data on the mechanisms of sensory interaction and sensory adaptation, how sensory interactions change over the course of long-term space missions. Turin also engaged in that SINER activity and also another Earth OBS activity known as Uragan, which uses the ISS as a monitoring device for areas where natural and man-made disasters are forecasted and relaying information and helpful tools down to responders on the ground. And then today, Friday, Turin will be engaged in that Toru drill along with Oleg Kotov. NASA astronaut Rick Mastracchio this week, starting off on Monday, collecting samples for the Human Research Facility and storing them in Melfi, or the -80-degree laboratory freezer. He also installed a torque analyzer kit on the pistol grip tool, or the PGT. It's basically a drill that the astronauts use during their spacewalks. He was installing that analyzer kit for ground analysis, just some routine analysis of the tool. On Tuesday, he was engaged in the microbiome experiment, which investigates the impact of space travel on both the human immune system and also the individual's microbiome, which is the collection of microbes that live both in and on the human body at any given time. On Wednesday, Mastracchio, some routine work inside of the Destiny lab, cleaning out the ventilation system and doing a quarterly inspection on the station treadmill, before moving on to Thursday when he was doing a photo survey of the station's external structure and also doing some ocular checkouts along with Hopkins and Wakata. Today, Mastracchio will end his week with a periodic fitness evaluation and also taking a few more samples for that human research facility. And the final crew member on board from the Japanese Aerospace Exploration Agency, Koichi Wakata, back on Monday was the subject for that cardio-ox experiment being scanned by Mike Hopkins with the station's ultrasound system. He was also setting up and doing a few checkouts on the new 4K high-definition camera that was flown to the International Space Station. He was setting that up in the cupola. That camera will be used to record super high-resolution Earth views and a few celestial views as well for the Japanese Aerospace Exploration Agency, among them including the comet Ison's transit as it makes its closest path to the Earth later on this month and in early December. On Tuesday, Wakata started off with the deployment of a number of microsatellites from the Japanese airlock. 3 were deployed on Tuesday. He set up the control laptops and operated the small satellite orbital deployment system. 3 of those going out of the station airlock into the vacuum of space on Tuesday, and then 1 more going out on Wednesday. Wakata deploying that 4th CubeSat at about 1:58 a.m. Central Time on Wednesday. You can see a pretty spectacular shot as the satellite passes in front of one of the solar arrays. Those CubeSats, small experimental satellites that are flown up to the station and then released into space through that airlock in the Japanese experiment module, flown by a number of commercial agencies and also educational, providing a fairly inexpensive and easy access path to space and flying small satellites. Moving on to Thursday, Wakata had been engaged in the circadian rhythms experiment, which looks to track how the sleep patterns of the astronauts changes over time, actually using their body temperature and the amount of heat they're radiating in order to track that through known mechanisms of the human body. Wakata was also doing some more experiment runs with the capillary flow experiment. He had gotten his first shot at it on Wednesday along with Hopkins, and then Thursday was operating the experiment on his own. That capillary flow, again, a fluid physics experiment on board that studies the force known as capillary force, which relies on surface adhesion to move liquids along in the absence of gravity, an important tool for fuel delivery systems and also other liquid delivery systems, such as the potable water devices for these astronauts and supplying water and other liquids such as fuels to various experiments on board the station. And then Wakata will round out his week today with a bit of light maintenance work and also the Sprint experiment, which is evaluating the use of high-intensity and low-volume exercise training in order to minimize the loss of both muscle and bone mass, also to maintain cardiovascular function in these astronauts during their long-duration missions. So again, a long week filled with a lot of biological research studies taking place and some maintenance tasks for the crew, but rounding out the week and looking forward to the following when they'll see a new visiting vehicle, a new Progress ship scheduled to launch to the station next Monday.